Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, 3 chapters per day, lesson 132, the Hilchos Maaser from chapter 4th until chapter 6. It is very appropriate to mention that given the fact that our forefathers kept the entire Torah before it was even given, as we learn in the Torah, at the time when Jacob was on a run, he was escaping from his brother Esau. He was on the way towards his future father-in-law, and he stops and he promised God Almighty. And he says, Im yeh Elokim imodi, if God Almighty will be with me and he will guard me baderech hazeh, and he will give me lechem lechoil ubeged lilboish, when I'll come back, I will give everything you're going to give it to me, aser asren eloch. Everything you give to me, I will give 10% to you, to God Almighty. So everything not only includes physical and financial assets, includes also his own children. So the last child of Jacob was Benjamin. Second to last was Yosef, and so on. So if you're going to count them from last to first, you're going to reach Levi as the 10th one. Everybody who learned Chumash Vayikra knows if a person possessed an entire barn of animals, he gotta bring them on, veho Assyria, and the 10th one will be Kodesh Lashem. So his own children, he also started first from Binyamin, and so on, moved on, and the 10th one was Levi. Levi, since he was the 10th one, and he was the holiest one who designated to God Almighty, so the translation of this holiness, which were defined by Jacob, was translated hundreds of years later by God Almighty when he appointed them to serve in the temple. The general service in the temple is being departmentized, divided into 3 sections. They were the shoyarim, they were standing and opening and closing the gates of the temple. They were shomrim, they were guarding the temples, and they were meshoirerim, they were singing in the temples. So those type of 3 services, important, vital services that they were giving to the nation of Israel, in exchange, God Almighty imposed a duty upon each and every one of us to take care of them via the Maaser. Maaser is the 10th of the field, of the orchard, of the trees, of the fruits that we are producing, must be given a 10th to the Levi. However, it is very important, and this is the primary subject that goes through all the 3 chapters of today. We know that a child, when he is born, so he needs to be circumcised. If after 8 days that he is alive and he is not circumcised, he is called a orel. A orel is a definition for a person who have not performed the mitzvah of circumcision. However, a child, before he have reached the age of 8 days, though he is not circumcised, but you cannot call him a orel. In fact, we have learned recently in the rules of Truma that a child, you can feed until the age of 8 days, you can feed him with Truma. The reason, because the prohibition is to give Truma for someone who is a orel. But if he has no commandment yet to circumcise, so the abstinent of being circumcised before he reached the age of 8 doesn't make him a orel. Similarly to this situation, we know that there is a big prohibition to eat fruits that they are considered to be tevel. Tevel is an abbreviation of two words. Tav lo, not good. Good, those fruits that you're supposed to designate out of them Tumo, Maaser, Tumas Maaser, all the gifts that we have covered, until at the moment that they, under a duty, under an obligation to take out of them the Tumois and Maasois, and you're not taking those gifts and giving them to the Kohen or to the Levi, then they will be considered tevel. But if they don't have a duty yet, you can eat them and you're not going to be violating any type of tevel. What makes a fruit qualified to be tevel in case a person did not give the tumo and maasos? First of all, the fruits needs to be ripe. The fruits needs to go through the final stage of the processing. What is a general stage of processing? When it's already separated from the shells, in case it's grains, it was already packaged, it was already stored, and biblically it must be arrived at your home. Until that point, that it is after the Gmar Meloche, after the finishing of the job and the arrival of the home, only then these fruits are subject for separation of tumois and maasois, and in case that the separation was not taking place, only then they can be defined as tevel. In case that the fruit is not ripe yet, or it's ripe but it's not finished, or biblically it did not even enter your house, or even further than this, it entered your house, but it did not enter your house via a gate, it entered the house via the roof, via a window. So biblically, such a fruit is not defined as tevel, because tevel is only a fruit that actually entered your house after the completion of the melocho and entered through the gates, because that's the open text in the Torah. Nevertheless, the actual items that are koive'a lemaiso in reality, so first of all, as we said, that the fruit needs to be complete, what we call gmar melocho. But then, when we said before it enters to the house, so even the house has many qualifications in order to be deserved the definition of house. If it's less than 2 meters by 2 meters, it's not a house. So even if it enters such a house, it will be exempt from tumois. You can eat it in the state of without tumois and maasois. Same way, temporary houses like hut, like sukkos, that are very temporary in their nature. Also, when the fruits are in such houses, they not koivea lemaiser, they cannot be defined as prohibited fruits of consumption. A person can go and consume them. Now, some people, those people who live in huts or temporary sukkos, they live on a permanent basis. So for them, such a house will be critical to define the fruits as subject to maaser, because for them, individual taste, such a house is considered a house. Then, what's about a yard? A yard of a house. Would it be subject to define the fruits as tevel and subject to Maaser? So the yard must have two conditions. Or such a yard that it's guarded, that you can really place over there precious object and be certain that they're not going to be stolen. Another way to define that a yard is really guarded, when somebody who is not from the area will be very appropriate for you to say to him, what are you doing over here? At the moment that a respond to an unfamiliar face, please explain what you're doing over here, will be appropriate, then this is the indication that this is indeed a private and guarded area. And for that reason, if a fruit enters to such a house, then those fruit will be subject to Maaser, and until a Maaser is being taken from them, they will be defined as tevel and prohibited to be eaten to a person. Sometimes there are what we call sukkos hayotzrim. Sukkos hayotzrim is different huts that trades people are operating out from there. Some artists or tradespeople or handymans are operating from such hut. Now, I guess the olden days, the way that they used to build them, with an internal department inside and an external department in those type of huts that were facing the street. So the external one is not guarded, while the internal one is more guarded. For that reason, if the fruit are still parked in the external one, they are not subject yet to Maaser. But if they are in the internal one, they are already subject to Maaser. Further than this, when we're speaking about that a house is kriveya, determining and putting a status of the fruit that they are subject to Maaser, is not a house that you will enter them on the go. For example, he gives a situation where peddlers used to go from town to town, and they used to schlep with them different fruits. Though the houses they are staying in, it's not their final and desired destination. For that reason, the fruits that they are bringing to those houses that they are still on the go won't be subject to Tumos and Maaser, and for that reason they are able to continue to consume those fruits without Tumos and Maaser. When we say, and this is also a very important thing to mention, in order to have a fruit forbidden for us to consume, to benefit from, until Maaser are taken from that fruit, two general conditions must be met. Condition number one, Gmar Melocho, the final stage of the completion of the job that necessary for the fruit, the collection, the storage, and so on. Then a second item, that or bringing it to the house, or additional 6 occurrences, which we'll be covering soon. Until at the moment that 2 of those conditions are met, so then it will be forbidden to benefit under no circumstances. At the moment that only 1 condition are met, and this is the condition of Gmar Melocho, where the second condition were not met, a person is permitted to benefit from these fruits on a temporary basis. What does it mean, a temporary basis? We gave yesterday an example where he only consumes one fruit at a time. He is not allowed to store them in quantities. Quantities more than one is already a quantity. So as long as he is taking one fruit at a time, then it will be okay. It's called the chilas aray. At the moment that two of the conditions were met, and I said two, the original, which is called the Gmar Melocho, and the second one, for that example, when we're speaking to enter to a proper house, then the person is forbidden to benefit even on a temporary basis until Maisois and Trumois will be taken from that type of fruit. Sometimes, however, and this is very interesting, though we spoke before that a yard will be considered in case it's a guarded yard, like a house. But sometimes, even though it's guarded, if a person decided to plant the entire yard and to turn it to some sort of a full garden, full-fledged garden, so then this yard, although it's guarded, I will view it as a field. And for that reason, fruits who enter there are not subject to Tumois and Maasrot yet. In other words, in the absence of Tumois and Maasrot, he's still able to go and benefit. There is a very interesting scenario. Until now we spoke, if a person brings from the outside into his house or into his guarded yard a fruit that the melocho is completed, so then at the moment it enters the house, he is not allowed to eat anymore until he will take Maaser. What happened if a fruit of a fig or a grape is growing at his own yard? It was not that he is bringing it from somewhere else. It happens to grow in this yard. Will he be forbidden to eat from it until Maaser were taken? And the answer, he is forbidden at the moment that he collects from those figs more than one fig. As long as he takes one fig at a time from the fig tree that is growing in his own yard, it's okay. He can eat it, he can consume it without Tumois and Maaser. When we speak about tevel, and I said before that the idea of tevel consists of two words, tav, lo, not good. There is an entire debate and discussion amongst the scholars about the origins of that particular prohibition. And there is two logical ways how to explain why a tevel is forbidden upon us to benefit from. There is one way to explain, since in these particular fruits there are future Trumois and Maaser, and as we have learned before so many times, that Trumois, in addition to the fact that it belongs to the Kohen as his own property, which was gifted to him by God Almighty, there is also an element of holiness and purity and spirituality and so on. For that reason, you gotta keep this fruit in a very special mode of care and attitude. So since in this particular fruit there is a future qualified tumo, so for this point I will view this bunch of fruit with the same approach as I would view tumo in general. This is one way to explain it. Then there is another way to explain it, is exactly the opposite. To explain that essentially every fruit, it's godly, it belongs to God. Until you have done your part to certify your access to it, essentially it's godly. So what happened? You are taking Tumo and you giving away to the Kohen. So basically, the Kohen, he took the only tevel that remained in this fruit, which means the only part that have changed the status is the status of the leftovers of the Tumo, which belong to us. There is two ways how to look at the entire process. There is one way, simple, official way, that there is three statuses over here. There is a status of tevel. After you doing what you're doing, you're dividing part to you, part to the Kohen, part to the Levi. Or there is another way to look at it, no? That essentially everything is godly. And the only thing that have downgraded or upgraded, became different, is the part that you are consuming, and this is called the chulin. The chulin part, this is the general consumption. I'm mentioning it because later we're going to see some interesting implication between the two views, two types of approach, in order to explain the idea of tevel versus tumo. So, in order to understand the second chapter, we got to introduce what we have mentioned yesterday, that midirabonon, there are 6 additional occurrences which they will make the fruit subject to tevel. Subject to tevel in case Maasrot were not taken, or in other words, subject to Maasrot. So again, subject to tevel is the same identical concept in order to define a fruit. When a fruit is a subject to Maaser, then if you did not took Maaser, then the fruit is tevel. So what makes a fruit subject to a Maaser? One of them is mekach. Mekach is the trade. Trade, which means at the moment that you took the fruit that is completed and you have sold it to another individual, at the actual sale turns those fruit to be subject to give Tumois and Maasrot. What type of a sale is considered to be a sale? And this is unique to Tumo, because though in Judaism in generally there is, to define a sale is not necessarily the actual payment, but the legal act that are changing the status of an object from being in a possession of one individual and coming to the possession of the other. Payment is an additional obligation that is imposed upon the buyer to satisfy the seller. But this is not generally what makes the transaction. When it comes to Tumo and Maasrot, in order to make a fruit subject to Tumo, the sale must be done with money. Only after payment, then the sale takes effect, and only then the fruits become subject to Tumo. On top of it, the sale must be done in the fruits that they are untouched, that they are detached from the ground, that they were cut from the ground. If the sale was on those types of fruits that they are still in the ground, so this type of sale is not subjugating the fruit to Maasrot, and it's not tevel, and the person can go ahead and consume as much as he wishes. We spoke many times that there is a general rule. In Aramaic it sounds like this: Kol ma de tikun rabbonon kein deiraisa tikun. Any institution that a rabbinical introduced, they always resembling and reflecting a deiraiso. What does it mean? Mi deiraiso, a individual will be subject to give terumos and maasrot only when the fruit came to his own house via the gate, but on top of it, it must be a personal consumption. He must consume it for personal reason. Biblically, midoiraiso, if a person is intending to sell it to others, so those fruit, biblically, they are not subject to terumos and maasrot. Rabbinically, they are. But the same as the Torah made a distinction between personal consumption or a consumption of a third party, same way the rabbis have made a distinction in a context of a sale. If a person is a buyer for his personal need, or he is buying on behalf of a third party. At the moment a person buys a fruit, though the transaction was done with money and the fruit is detached from the ground, yet the intention of the purchase was for a third party, so then even rabbinically they are not subject to the maasrot, which again resemble the same way as a biblically there is a distinction between personal use or in behalf of a third party, same way as also midirabonon there is a distinction like this. Sale not necessarily can be done through the currency of money, can be done through another valuable currency. For example, barter. Barter, when two people are making a barter amongst themselves, where both of the objects that were bartered happen to be fruits that they, after Gmar Melocho, after the completion of the work, so then both of the fruits will be subject to maasrot. If, for example, it happened to be a barter where one party gets fruits that they are eatable immediately, and the other party gets fruit that needs some additional process. Example, his intention to take those grapes and turn them to raisins, or to take those type of figs and to turn them into dry figs. Since the intention over here is displaying a situation where by one of the parties the type of food that we're speaking over here has not reached the stage of Gmar Melocho yet, so this owner of this type of product, he will be exempt that his fruit will be subject to terumos and maasrot, because he happened to get those type of fruit that they are not Gmar Melocho yet, they are not completed their process that they need to go through. There is a very interesting, and this is how it comes in connection to Maaser. There is an obligation, a biblical obligation, when a person works for another person in his field. So, under certain condition, if the actual work is involved in the agricultural industry, in the agricultural field, both literal and configuratively, so he is entitled to eat from the actual food that he is working with. Not every employee is permitted, only an employee in the field and only an employee in the stages that are leading to the final process of distribution of harvest, grapes, and so on. Now, can this type of payment that he is obligated biblically to provide his employee turn this actual receiving of the fruit as subject to Maaser? And the answer, absolutely not. Because since there is already a pre-existing biblical obligation, duty upon him to fulfill, so this is not like a typical transaction where a new initiative comes to the picture. In order to make a transaction, a new initiative of an exchange between two people must be introduced. But since we're talking over here about a pre-existing duty that the employer has towards his employee when he is working for him in the field, to give him access to the fruit that he is working with, so this type of benefit cannot be considered a payment or a transaction. If he offers him an extra additional payment, then this type of fruit that he is eating will be considered a transaction, as a mekach, as a trade that will make this fruit subject to Tumas and Maasrot. So for that reason, when a employee was making a extra deal with his employer, extra payment over the one that the Torah gives him already. So this extra payment for the fruit will make the fruit subject to what we call Maasrot. However, since he is still in the process of the field, so there is only one condition met, only the condition of the mekach, of the transaction, but the fruit are still in the before the gmar melocho, before the completion of the work. So for that reason, a person will be able to consume on a temporary basis, on a single basis, one fruit at a time. But at the moment that he is taking more than one, he is himself making the gmar melocho, the completion of their job, and that way it will be forbidden. There is another thing that is koiveya, that makes a fruit, a product, subject to Maaser, and this is called the melach. Melach is salt. Here is a perfect example. In the biblical obligation, employer has towards his employee to give him access in the field when he is collecting the harvest or the grapes. So the employee can take this grape and eat it because he is pre-existing commitment of the employment is not considered to be a trade. However, at the moment that he is salting, we're talking over here, let's say olives, and he puts his olive into salt for extra taste. At the moment that he is salting more than one olive at a time, he taking 2 or more olives at a time, then he is exposing himself to the occurrence which is called the salting, melach. At the moment that he is exposing himself to salting, the salting itself is already making the fruits to be subject to Tumois and Maisois, and without them, as we said before, they will be tevel. There is another thing that will turn the completed fruit into subject to Tumois and Maisois, and this is when he is cooking them. Not necessarily cooking only, can be smoking them, can be pickling them. Even in certain things, when it comes to garlic, certain types of garlics, even crushing them is a form of cooking them. Changing their shape is also, under certain condition, will be considered cooking. The last thing that will make fruit subject to Tumois and Maisois is when Shabbos kicked in. When a person is collecting fruits from the field, they are completed field, and as we said before, he is still allowed to consume them on a temporary basis as long as Shabbos doesn't come in. At the moment that Shabbos came in, so Shabbos itself is already making the fruit subject to Maisois. And further than this, he says that sometimes there is certain trees that were designated to benefit from those trees for the purpose of Shabbos. So anything that grows on the fruit will be eatable on Shabbos. So at the moment a person, even on a Wednesday or a Sunday, collects from this fruit, he is forbidden to consume from those fruits until Maisois will be taken. Why? Because since they were designed and they were intended to begin with to be for Shabbos, so though Shabbos have not kicked in chronologically, date-wise, but nevertheless, I will apply the same effectiveness that Shabbos will be playing a role normally, I will apply him in such a case. Which again echoes a very famous idea which encrypted already in the 10 Commandments. The word is zocher. In Hebrew, the word zocher, shomer, is not only just guard or remember, but also always be in a state of remembering. Don't just remember once, but never stop from the state of remembering the Shabbos. For that reason, in the halacha it's being brought, even the story of Shammai, that he lived with the Shabbos from the beginning of the week. Every time he saw a good piece of fish, a good dish, he used to purchase it for Shabbos. Later on, if he saw a better one, he kept the better one and ate the previous one, and so on. So he lived with the entire week on the idea of Shabbos. In the last chapter, as we spoke before and as we mentioned before, that there is 2 ways how to look at Tevel. So we see a reflection of this idea in the ruling itself. First of all, it is forbidden to benefit from a fruit that is Tevel. And we explained that basically a Tevel is any fruit that any fruit that was already completed and went through one of those 6 occurrences that subjugating the fruit for to be tevel. So not only it is forbidden to consume it, this goes without saying. Further than this, even if the fruit became contaminated, tomei, nevertheless, it will be forbidden to use this fruit or this object, trees, to burn them, because same way as a truma that is tomei must be used only by the kohen and no one else is allowed to benefit from, same way a tevel must be treated similarly and no one will be allowed to benefit even from the fire that he will be able to produce from those fruits or from those trees. A person is also forbidden to go same way as he is forbidden to take seeds of truma and plant them. And you remember we spoke that though biblically may not be a problem, but nevertheless rabbinically there is so many restriction upon gidulei tumo, anything that grew out of the tumo. Same type of restriction will be on those items when a person took seeds that belongs to tevel and plant them. So again, whatever will grow will also going to be forbidden. Sometimes it will be forbidden only immediately, and in certain cases it will be forbidden even for 2-3 future growth of whatever came out of the tevel as a mean of a knas, as a mean of a penalty. A person is forbidden also to pay his debt from an item that is tevel. A person is, not obviously he goes without saying he's not allowed to sell the tevel. Only in very, very exceptional cases when there is for a need of a mitzvah, or the person that he is selling to, he is very well aware about the status of the fruit and he won't be putting a stumbling block in front of a blind man, in the sense nothing wrong will come out of it. So this will be the only exceptions where tevel will be permitted to sell. If a government took away his fruit, that they are tevel, they are subject to tumois. So the idea is maybe it will be passed to another person who is not aware and will consume them without tumois and Maaser and will be violating a very terrible crime. So depends if they took it for what reason. If they took it for no reason, as they used to flex their muscle, so that he will be exempt. But at the moment that he took it away for a reason, that for example he owes the money, so this is basically his own fault, so his obligation is to perform Maaser, which means take the 10th% of those fruits that they took it away, but 10% from somewhere else, and give it to the Levi and the Kohen accordingly, in order to make sure that those fruits won't be a stumbling block for others. So that's basically a summary of today's subject, and in the first 2 chapters we spoke about those 6 occurrences that are necessarily for a fruit to be subject to Maaser. And when I say subject, A, that he has an obligation to give, B, in case he doesn't fulfill his obligation, then those fruits are remaining tevel, and anybody who consumes them is being exposed to a very terrible crime. In the second part of the shiur, we covered under what circumstances a tevel will be allowed to trade, to consume, and what will be done with the gidulit tevel, whatever grows from the tevel. There is, we won't have time to cover today, different type of an agreement between a person who rents a field and pays as rent for the field, or from the fruits of the field, or from the equivalent value of the fruits by other fruits. How far it is his duty to inform the landlord or the owner of the field about the status of the tevel fruits he possesses in his field. So that's basically, on a nutshell, the shiur of today. I want to wish everybody ksiva v'chasim toivo, a good and a gebencht yom. Thank you.
אתה יודע שזה כל מה שאמרת לפני שבועיים